Today on the Oxygen Advantage podcast, we've got James Newbury from Australia, one of the top CrossFit athletes in Australia, maybe even in the world. So welcome so much.
Mate, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. To be honest, when you contacted me, I was actually really excited. Probably the most excited I've been for a podcast in a long time.
That's great. That's great to hear. So it is. Thanks very much, James.
It's a good thing that, and you're in isolation, so it's a good time to do these types of, spend time doing podcasts.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm day 24 of 28 in isolation here in Australia after doing a bit of overseas travel for about 4 months. So I did 2 weeks in Sydney in a hotel room, and now I'm in the back end of the second week in Adelaide in a home quarantine. So I'm ready to come out. I'm due.
And we're super excited to have you on here because the reason is that, like I said before, I saw you doing a podcast talking specifically about breathing. And since you're a top athlete, and especially in CrossFit, it's very, very exciting to hear your thoughts on that. But before we kind of go into all those things, let's go back for a brief background. And also, I know you had a rough 2019 with a punctured lung and a broken back, so and how that affected your breathing or not. But so take us back a little bit to where it all started.
Sure. So I actually first discovered working on breathing passively just to help sport when I wasn't working out back in 2016. I was introduced by a guy named Brian McKenzie. I was actually training in Costa Mesa at the time, getting ready for my rookie year at the CrossFit Games. And he was working with another athlete in the gym that I was training at. And I saw them doing some work in the corner, and it was intriguing to me. I love to learn. I've got a very open mind when it comes to pretty much everything, to be honest, but especially when it comes to how do I improve and optimize my performance. So when he started talking to me about contrast therapy, talking about breathing techniques, talking about, oxygenating the tissues better and gaining more oxygen to be transported around, I was like, okay, this is cool. I need to understand more about this. And that was my first introduction. So basically I went through and I did the CrossFit Games in 2016. And once it was all done and dusted, endurance was typically something that was, more in my wheelhouse rather than, say, top end strength. Strength was something I worked on a lot, but endurance was usually a little bit more biased towards endurance. And then after the games, I was like, man, I need to get better at endurance. Like, this is just crazy. So I actually reached out to Brian again and I said, hey mate, like I really was intrigued with what you talked to me about in increasing performance and becoming more adaptive and being able to handle stress better and being able to recover better and being able to improve and boost endurance and performance and oxygenation just through breath work. Can you send me some protocols? And kind of just flourished from there.
Yeah. I mean, we had Brian on, we did a podcast a few months back, and he also, so I know he does a lot of testing on himself. So I'm sure you got a lot of help from that. But when you started doing that, did you see other people around you taking notice, or, or are they just saying, oh, that's a crazy guy? Because that was 5 years ago. It's a little bit different today, maybe.
Yeah. When I first started it, mainly the questions I got were like, what are you doing? And it was something that I introduced, one aspect was doing it for recovery and doing it to gain control of my breath, being able to, and I love to surf as well. So this was a big proponent of it too. I love to surf and I wanted to be more comfortable surfing big waves. So it was trying to become comfortable and become more CO2 tolerant when I'm under the pump out in the surf. So I know I can go, attack bigger surf and, get pummeled and not, be so fearful of dying. So in the beginning, everyone was kind of like, oh, what are you doing? And then it came to a competition, and, the competitions from then on, just rapidly, I got better and better and better. And people started to take notice as my performance started to increase.
So I know you finished number 5, is that correct, on the 2019 CrossFit Games?
Correct.
And then I guess I'm assuming it was after that you broke your back and had to puncture lung. How did that affect did you work more or less on breathing when that happened?
To be honest, I actually worked a little bit more after that because I had a little bit of time. So what happened was, I'll give you the spiel of how this happened and how the breath work actually did help me. But I'm just watching my battery run out. Give me literally like 10 seconds, and I'm going to grab my extension cord. 1 second.
Do that quickly.
Sorry about that, guys.
No problem.
Alrighty, I just had to get the bigger charger. So continuing on, so basically what happened was finished the 2019 games. I placed 5th, had a great season. And then from there, prior to going to the CrossFit Games, I actually dabbled in a 70.3 triathlon. And I did it to get back into training because I took a bit of a break, and I was just like, oh, maybe I could do this to get back into training, get a bit of a flow back. And then from there, I was like, oh, I've actually got a bit of a soft spot for triathlon. So post games, I said, oh, we should get together as a group and do a full Ironman. And from there, I was basically doing a bit of CrossFit training for maybe 15 hours a week. And then on top of that, maybe around 6 or 7 hours of triathlon training. Went up into the hills, was doing some mountain biking and some extracurricular training, came off my mountain bike, basically spearheaded a tree, broke a few spinal processes, punctured a lung, had a few broken ribs, bit of a concussion. And so I was just like, okay, how do I turbocharge my recovery? Like, I've got an Ironman in 5 weeks' time. I'm laid up in hospital and I'm going to do this Ironman. And basically all the doctors were just like, oh yeah, you're not doing that.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, we'll see. So I literally just went as soon as I could, basically with the punctured lung or with the pneumothorax that I had, I could only take in a breath, only very partially, like maybe 10% of total capacity. So it was quite uncomfortable. And so what I would naturally breathe through my nose anyway, after learning how important it was originally. So I tried to get a little bit more percent out of my breath every day laying in hospital. But then the day that I got out and I was allowed to leave, I got back on. I wanted to really try and figure out things that would help me bounce back as much as possible. So I got on the bike, the stationary bike. It was like I was still very stiff and I couldn't really move, but at least I could move my legs around and nasal breathe through that. So every day I would do an hour and then add an hour the next day. On top of that, so that was all through the nose. Every day I live very close to the beach, only about 150 meters. So I would walk to the beach multiple times a day. I would get in the water multiple times a day. I would sit in my float tank. I would sauna probably in an average week, probably sauna 8 to 10 times. I would get a lot of sunlight, things like that. So basically I was just turbocharging as much as I possibly could. And every day I was gaining a little bit more breath. I was gaining a little bit more percentage out of my breath. And then basically at one particular point, I think it was on day 9 or day 10, post accident, I went to the beach. I went into the water, and at this point, I was probably at about 50% breath, and a wave appeared out of nowhere. And at that point, I still had to kind of like turn like with everything all at once. And I was like, I can't make it back to shore. This wave is coming. Literally any sudden movement was like excruciating. And I remember just fall underneath the water and let the wave just go over the top of you. And as I did this, just natural reaction going under the water is you take a sharp breath in. So I took a breath in and out of nowhere, I had this almost like a sternum release, like a big sort of cracking sensation as I went under the water and I took a sharp breath, and I went from 50% to 100% just like that. And it was the most satisfying feeling. And then from there, it was just really about trying to oxygenate my body as much as possible. I had some breathwork protocols that I was following, and it was just about, trying to gain some oxygen, and really just make sure that I was giving my tissues as much satisfaction as possible, to try and do as much healing as I could, to try and heal my bones, heal my lungs, and be ready to take on this Ironman 5 weeks later.
It's pretty amazing. It's a great story. So it is.
I'm not sure that's the normal prescription from doctors to go out and do big surfing after 9 days and an Ironman 5 weeks later. That's a different protocol. That's an amazing recovery. I'm wondering also that it's not just breathing. Also, you mentioned sauna and float tanks, and I know the water down there. I don't know what time of the year. It's not that cold in Adelaide. So it's
mental strength as well, Daniel.
Yeah,
is a huge part.
Yeah, it's an amazing recovery. So you don't suffer from that anymore at all, because it was only 2 years ago.
No, not at all. To be honest, after about, I would say, I didn't even think about it really until, maybe 21 days. 21 days after that, I didn't feel uncomfortable, had no stiffness. I was pretty well back to doing everything. I was back in the pool swimming without a big rotation in my stroke. But I was back swimming after, I think, 2 weeks. And then I went back and I got scans on my ribs on day 16 or 17, I believe. And they were just like, interesting.
Yeah.
What was their expectation as far as recovery? Because I'm thinking of how important it is for recovery. Did they tell you a month, 2 months, 3 months, or did they give you?
They said 6 weeks.
6 weeks.
They said typically average person will have the bones and the lungs healed within 6 to 8 weeks. They said we've seen people get them done in 4 weeks before, but just depending on the person. And I was probably around that 3 week mark. But I do take my recovery quite seriously. Like, I've literally set my house up to make sure I could, I'm by the beach, I'm by fresh air. I've got an infrared sauna, I've got a float tank and an ice bath sitting here, and I got a gym out the back. So I do really enjoy and take my recovery fairly seriously. It wasn't for me. Like, I love competing, but it's not the be all and end all for me. It's like, I would never want to sacrifice longevity for a gold medal. That's just not part of why I do what I do. I love a challenge, and I love to grit and to love to work hard. But for me, it was more about making sure that I could fortify myself to be able to handle the heavy training volume that we do as CrossFitters, be able to handle the high repetitions, making sure my tissues are going to bounce back, making sure my tendons are going to be healthy, making sure like I'm just covering all my bases so I can still surf when I'm 60, 70 years old. I never wanted to get to the point where I buckled myself so badly that I would come out the back end of professional sport and be left with bad knees, bad hips, bad shoulders, and chronic fatigue potentially. So it was not something that I was really interested in, which is why whenever I looked at things like, the importance of breath work, the importance of, contrast, the importance of sleep, the importance of hydration, the importance of sunlight, all those things were things that kind of resonated with me. And I said, yeah, I can get into that for sure. Even to the point where I was sitting in the float tank and, it's probably a lot of voodoo, but I was just picturing my lungs healing and picturing my bones just, repairing and things like that. And, whether it helped or not, I still felt good, and I still completed the Ironman 5 weeks later. So it worked. In my mind, it worked.
Yeah,
it worked.
That's for sure. I'd love to know some of your protocol. Like, there's stuff there that's, that we're familiar with it. We're working with it for pretty much decades in terms of recovery. The science hasn't yet caught up in some instances. And even tissue injury, James, there's a few papers whereby they got rats and they damaged the tibialis muscle, which is a muscle running down the shin. And they divided the rats into different groups. And in one group of rats, they administered carbon dioxide through the skin into the muscle. And about 6 weeks later, I can't remember exactly, they sacrificed all the rats. And the groups who were treated with carbon dioxide, the muscle injury had repaired. Now,
Wow.
You're doing breath holding, you're doing nasal breathing during physical exercise, you're doing light breathing, I'm assuming, as well. And by doing that, you're increasing carbon dioxide in the blood. And as carbon dioxide increases in the blood, it slows down the release of carbon dioxide from the tissue. So you also build it up in the tissue. And when there's an increase of CO2 in the tissue, hemoglobin is going to release more oxygen to that tissue. And these are simple things that athletes could be doing, whether they are in rehabilitation or competitive athletes. And sleep as well, breathing through the nose, for example, was one of the best things that I had ever learned. Sorry, there, of course, is going to be an interruption. And waking up with dry mouths. And how many athletes are waking up with dry mouths in the morning? How many athletes are having dysfunctional breathing patterns during the day and don't even realize how this is impacting their competition? So yeah, I think they've missed the simple stuff has been overlooked, you know, and it's nice to see it kind of getting out there. And that's why reaching out to you has been brilliant, because to see somebody actually putting it into practice, even though there's a few people, but they are the early adopters. Yeah. It hasn't kind of reached that stage. It's just still at the start of it, you know, and we'd love to see it hitting that tipping point.
Yeah. And honestly, I think it will. And, you know, now I don't even think about it. It's, you know, it's just habit to breathe through my nose. I don't have to worry about it during the night. Like I'm a nose breather all night long. I even notice it in other people. Like I'll see people, I'll be talking to, say, for instance, my brother, and he has a habit every now and again. He'll just do this. Yes. And I'll just be like, nose man, you just start using your nose. And you can tell they take that reprieve. It's almost like they run out of oxygen just having a conversation. And it's just, I think it's just retraining. It's just retraining some habits and just keeping it conscious for a little while. And then after a period of time, it just becomes second nature to always revert back to the nose. And, you know, and then when I'm in the absolute hurt locker and I'm at peak end, like fighting for the very last rep and I'm to and fro, like I'll revert back to mouth just to get through and finish. But I'll typically start every single workout through the nose as long as possible. And then when push comes to shove and I'm really fighting to hold on and to get reps done and to finish the fastest time possible, then I do revert. But there's actually an interesting statistic that Brian and I came up with when I first started the protocols. And my protocol was 2 passive relaxed sessions per day. I would have an AM session and a PM session. And he probably mentioned some of these protocols. I did a cadence variant in the morning and I did an apnea variant in the PM. Anytime so
the cadence is breathing in. Was it breathing in for 5 seconds and breathing out for 5 seconds, or breathing in for 4 and breathing out for 6?
Yeah, well, the cadence was, the ratio was 1, 1, 2, 1. So I would breathe in for 5, I would hold for 5, breathe out for 10, hold out for 5.
Yeah.
Yes. And then basically I would increase that second count as my ability got better. So when I first did this, he gave me the protocol of it. He said, start off with 7, 7, 14, 7, only through the nose and do it relaxed. I couldn't even do that. I couldn't get through. He said 10 minutes. Once you achieve 10 minutes doing this repetitively without feeling the need to hold or get a jolt out of your chest, he said, then you can move on and move it up by a second. And I messaged him.
That was quite a challenge to set somebody starting off 7, 7, 14, 7. So you're talking about 28 and so 7, 7 is 14 is 28 and 7. So you're talking about 35, 2 breaths per minute. I know it working with, and Daniel, you do too, even Premiership footballers. And I'm not saying but highly trained athletes would not be able to do it. We use a bolt score. I don't know if Brian used it. We use a breath hold time. So we have the athletes sit down and they take a normal breath in and out and pinch their nose and hold their breath just until the first definite desire to breathe. And the goal is 40 seconds. But of course, most people, the vast majority are like, a good athlete will have about 20. but we need them above minimum of 25 and a goal of 40 seconds. And I suppose, James, if you've got a high Bolt score, it means that you will have lighter breathing during physical exercise. You can do less with more. You're not going to get gassed out. Whereas you're talking about your brother and he's sighing and he has irregular breathing, or he's running out of air during talking. If he does physical exercise, he's going to gas out. And that's another aspect. But we would, if an athlete came in with a Bolt score of 30 or 40 seconds, I'd have no problem going, breathing in for 7, holding for 7, out for 14, holding for 7. But we develop it. And that's the interesting, you adapt to it.
Oh, 100%. So that's interesting you bring that up, because I was like, I messaged him, I said, Brian, this is impossible. Like, I think this is wrong. Am I doing this wrong? Like, am I reading this incorrectly? And he's like, oh man, knock it back. Go back to 5. So I did 5. And mind you, when I tried the 7, I just finished a workout. So I was a little bit depleted there in terms of oxygen stores. But so I ended up doing 5, then moved on to 6 and moved on to 7. And during these periods of doing the cadence work in the AM and the apnea work in the PM, I would also do 4 sessions a week focused on breath while working out. And this was usually just with a monostructural piece. So it could be anything from just bike, assault bike, rower, or running. And those sessions would look like, for instance, my short burst session. So my CO2 tolerance session would look like 30 seconds of 90% plus effort, holding nose only during that 30 seconds as long as possible until I had to use my mouth. And then at the end of the 30 seconds, I had 1 effort, max breath hold. So I had to breathe in, max breath hold after max effort.
And breathe in and hold, or breathe out and hold.
Sorry, breathe out and hold. So lose all my breath, hold with nothing in there. Yeah. And I would roughly get 7 to 10 seconds maybe. Yeah. And then I would have 30 seconds of nose breathing, and then I would have to repeat it. And then I might get around about 20 to 25 seconds, and then I would have to repeat it one more time. Mm-hmm. So basically, it'd be bike effort, it'd be hold, 30 seconds of nose breathing, hold, 30 seconds of nose breathing, hold. And that was 1 effort. And I had 5 efforts to do. So that would be 1 session. Another session I would do was, it was a little bit longer. So it was usually 4 rounds of 7 minutes, nose breathing only. And I would have to ramp up my heart rate during that session. So basically I would work up to aerobic threshold for the first 5 minutes. And then every 30 seconds thereafter, nose only, I would have to bump up my heart rate by 3 beats a minute. Okay, so increasing wattage. When I first started this, that one in particular, I could not hold my aerobic threshold nose only. Like, I had to revert to mouth before I felt like I was going to pass out. Eventually, I could get within 6 weeks of doing this, I could get my threshold, which at that time was around about 132 beats a minute aerobic. I could then hold nose only at 162 beats a minute. So right up at the upper end of my threshold, nose only. And also I could potentially maintain a conversation at that pace too.
Yeah, no, it's interesting.
Sorry. Yeah, it was crazy. It was crazy. And then the last session, the third session that I would do would just be a long 40 to 60 minutes, nose only, maintaining around about aerobic threshold. So a talkative pace, but not talking, mouth shut, nose only. And that would be on any type of monostructural piece. So they were my 3 active sessions or dynamic sessions. And then I would use my cadence in the morning and apnea in the evening. And that apnea was a ratio of 1-4-2. So I didn't have the hold at the end, but it was just 1-4-2, 1-4-2 as a ratio.
That's very extensive training. I mean, most of the time, at least starting off, you start much smaller. So I'm very impressed. And Patrick, on that, when you did assault bike when you did 90 plus effort, and then you held your breath, did you notice improvement after a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks, and you still do it? Because I find that very interesting, because you can measure it to the point. You can see how many meters or calories you do over that effort, and you can see your improvement.
Absolutely. So I went from, probably in the beginning, And I have I have some of these data points written down in a spreadsheet somewhere from years ago, somewhere. I think I still have my ramp test where I showed an increase or a spike in heart rate to give you my original aerobic threshold, and then my original anaerobic threshold. And then you can see the change in where I was over the course of the first probably 8-week block that we did. But initially, say those 30-second max efforts, I would only get 5 seconds in the beginning. And then eventually I was getting to be able to hold over 10 seconds. Yes, the time frame in seconds was a very small, only 5 or 6 seconds, but in the degree of what we were testing, that was actually fairly substantial. Whereas I know, for instance, I could, after that, holding 130 beats a minute nose only was a walk in the park. Like it was before, I couldn't even do it. I get to maybe 127 and have to revert to mouth.
I think there's two components at least. I think the first one is, if you're not used to breath holding, it will be a mental threshold at first, because you're not really improving maybe the first couple of weeks. Then you may be improving. So how many weeks did it take for you before you saw in numbers when you did the test? And then did you see a translation into your normal workouts later on?
Within about 2 to 3 weeks.
Yeah. And did it help you in your normal workouts later on? Did you feel that you had a little, yeah. Okay.
Oh, like black and white. It was just crazy. The control that I had, the relaxed and calm demeanor that I could take into workouts was fantastic. Knowing that I could utilize for a long effort, I could utilize nose breathing to set a pace for myself as well. And if I had to revert to mouth breathing, I would want to be sure that I was very close to the finish line. Because as soon as I revert to that, I would start chewing through a lot more energy than I would prior. So if, for instance, during that Ironman that I did that, except for the swimming portion, mind you, but for that Ironman, I did it all through the nose. I think I maybe, if anything, took, I don't know, a dozen breaths while I was trying to grab water and things like that through it. But the movement part on the bike and the movement part on the run, only nose.
It's amazing.
It's amazing, Daniel, and people won't believe this, but we know it. Now, the only thing I think going in James's favor is that anatomically, James, you've got, just on observation, a really good wide facial structure, forward development of the jaws. You don't have nostrils that are like mine, pinched little nostrils. So you've got a really good airway. And that would make things easier, because you might have some athlete and he's a face like mine, and he's going to go for a run with his mouth closed and he's going to go blue. So there's a couple of aspects to it. One is, if an athlete has a higher Bolt score, it's easier to sustain nasal breathing during physical exercise. The second is the anatomy of the face. And the third then, of course, is fitness levels. But you hit the mark when you said 6 weeks. Within 6 weeks, you were able to push yourself with nasal breathing just as much with mouth breathing. And with the same air hunger, because initially when you start switching from mouth to nose breathing, the air hunger ramps up a little bit. And this puts people off. But they don't realize that if you do your physical exercise with the mouth closed, you're feeling that increased air hunger, which is telling you that carbon dioxide is increased in the blood, because when you do physical exercise, you produce a lot more carbon dioxide. So the production of carbon dioxide is increased. And now switching and keeping the mouth closed, the carbon dioxide increases in the blood because it cannot get out of the body so quickly enough. But this is where the brain adapts to the higher tolerance of carbon dioxide. And carbon dioxide is the primary stimulus to breathe. So how many athletes in any games have disproportionate breathlessness, something is holding them back, and they don't put it down to their breathing, and it's all trainable. And that's the best thing about it. And the breath holds, I think, are a no-brainer too, I wrote a book called The Oxygen Advantage back 6 years ago, but I started writing it 10 years ago.
I've listened.
It's very few people were doing it in sports at the time, and it's starting to get in there. But breath holds make so much sense, because even from the mental component of it, like Daniel said, you're holding your breath. It's a primordial feeling of suffocation. There's a mental component that you're to relax into it. But as you hold your breath, especially after an exhale, without doing the hyperventilation beforehand, as you hold your breath, carbon dioxide increases in the blood, increases blood flow to the brain. And this is a calming effect. So it has been described as a narcotic gas. And we use it with people with panic disorder, people with anxiety, people with recovery, and even increasing heart rate variability. So the science is getting out there. So yeah, so this is really, really interesting. So there's
well, so even some more statistics that came out, and mind you, it was also becoming okay with how to control the release of the breath. I was the gearing of release of breath was difficult because all I knew was in, out, in, out, in, out. I didn't know how to let it come slowly and let it come back in slowly, knowing that it's coming and I don't need to rush because I don't need the oxygen just yet. That was something that helped me a lot with the cadence and apnea, was learning how to control the rate at which I inhaled and the rate at which I exhaled. Because I think a lot of people get caught up in the exhale and exhaling too quickly, typically because they just let it go through the mouth all the time. So I think my best ever score that I did over 10 minutes, and mind you, probably the last minute, I had to really hold on, but I ended up getting the 12s. So 12-second inhale, 12-second hold, 12-second inhale, 12-second hold, 24-second exhale, 12-second hold.
Yeah, 60, one breath.
Yep.
And this was a master yoga instructor back in the day, before yoga came into the Western world. Master yoga instructors were breathing to one breath per minute, and they could sustain it for 1 hour. Now, all of that information has got lost, and it seemed to get lost when it was transmitted through the generations. And we would love to see it coming back, but it's amazing. And I'd say to anybody listening, give that a go, what James was doing. And don't do it with mouth breathing. And don't do it with these massive, full, big breaths. It's a very subtle, gentle breathing in for 12 seconds, even though you're likely to fill your lungs, but very subtly over the course of 12 seconds, holding for 12 seconds, breathing out for 24 seconds, holding for 12 seconds. That's a challenge.
Try and get at least a minute or two. Try for 2 minutes. It's difficult. It's very difficult. But like those types of things really did help me gain control of stressful situations. And I could apply that to many things. I could apply it in the water when I was surfing or competing out in the water. I could apply it during workouts where things would get stressful, and it'll just come back to breath. So whenever I was stressed, the most basic thing that I had to think about whenever I was, maybe losing control or losing focus is like, just breathe. Breathe. That's it. No matter what, if you breathe, you'll be okay and you'll get through it. And, the Ironman itself was a good test because, I went into that knowing that, roughly a first attempt Ironman, people would be getting anywhere from 12 to 13 hours. And I was, quite interested to see where I would come, not being a hardcore endurance athlete. And
so you'd never done it before. This is your first Ironman ever.
Oh yeah, probably in terms of triathlon, it was like my third triathlon. Yeah. Okay. And we were all just like, yeah, why not? Let's give this thing a go. Like, let's give a full distance Ironman a go. And I actually roped in about 12 other people to come over and do it with me. So, and they were all, I was like, hey guys, you want to go do an Ironman? And so I think we had 5 or 6, we had 6 people do the full distance, and we had, I think, 6 people do the 70.3 on that day. And our goal as a group was to go there and just to complete it. We weren't looking for a particular time, but then we also got together and did some of this nasal breathing leading in to the Ironman itself. And that would be going on long rides and, trying to nasal breathe, but we would also chat a lot, obviously, just to keep things going. But a lot of the time when you're, climbing hills and stuff, the aim would be to nasal breathe.
Yeah. But even for switching to mouth breathing, even for brief periods of time is necessary when the intensity gets too much, because if the air hunger is excruciating, it's too uncomfortable. And I'd often say to elite athletes, because I think there is a fear for athletes to introduce anything new, such as breathing, because they feel that there's a risk and it's going to disrupt everything that they're doing. But the one thing about the breath is that you can kind of interweave it in different places. that
Correct.
you can do it in a way that you can just gently condition your body to it. And as you say, it's conditioning body, but it's also conditioning mind.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the thing that people lose sight of here, and especially when I talk to people about it, is that's the reason why I had my three dynamic sessions that I locked in on breath, and there was control there for the nose. And then I also gained my intensity, which I need for CrossFit, in my CrossFit sessions as well. So people would say to me, well, if I only use my nose, I get no intensity, and we need intensity for CrossFit. Otherwise we can't adapt there. I was like, yeah, that's fine. I get it completely. Have some training sessions where, yes, you do have to get to the point where it becomes so excruciating. You have to use your mouth, for sure. But you can always start out at a decent pace using your nose. And then when you have to revert, but then just put a couple of extra sessions that don't take, longer than 40 minutes. If you're a full-time athlete, that's not a long time because we spend hours in the gym anyway. And those other sessions only took less than 25. But take those sessions, that's where you focus on your nose and try and make sure that your breath is controlled in those elements, and then leave the intensity for another time. And you'll still get intensity, but then you're also still getting the adaptation here too at the same time.
Yeah.
So you can get the best of both worlds.
Totally. Daniel.
How do you, one thing that's very interesting is that CrossFit is different from essentially any other sport, that if you do a triathlon and you swim or you run, you do it for hours. So you kind of get into this rhythm. But if you're in a CrossFit training session or competition, you switch between deadlift, rope climb, burpees, box jumps, wall balls, whatever, different lengths of movement. How do you handle your breathing when you switch and you do some of these so quickly that you cannot just do one breath in, one breath out? Maybe you do one breath for the full movement, or how do you handle that?
Typically, yeah, that's a good question. Typically, depending on the type of movement, there are some movements where I would like to hold my breath for potentially 5 reps in a row. If I go upside down and I go into a handstand push-up and, there may be, 10 reps in a particular round, I will try and get majority of those done on one breath. But in essence, pretty much for everything else that I do, I'll usually go one breath per rep. Okay. That's typically how I flow. And then if it's, say, for instance, like a pull-up that really expands and lengthens that diaphragm area, it almost sucks the air back in for me. And so I do that through my mouth. But then when I transition from pull-up, say, to deadlift, I try and go straight back to nose.
Okay.
As much as possible. So, and then basically when I get to deadlift, it'll be basically breathe in, deadlift, breathe in and out, deadlift, breathe in and out, deadlift. So I'm only breathing once per rep. So I'm not hyperventilating myself. I'm keeping it nice and smooth and controlled. And typically the most controlled athletes out there are usually the ones that can sustain it for the correct period of time. Some people may take off and they may be ahead in the beginning, but then you typically just chip away. And then it also becomes a mental game. As soon as they start seeing that, one round, they're 10 reps behind, the next round they're 8, the next round they're 5, the next round they're 1, you start playing mind games at that point. So that's how I've learned to deal with it. But being calm, if you're out there and you look like you're in the absolute pain cave in the hurt locker, it plays an even vaster, it makes you worse. If you can be cool, calm, and collected until the workout's done, you'll probably finish in a better state than if you look like hell the whole time.
Yeah. What would you say the top athletes in CrossFit, how many are into breathing like you? Like, say, the CrossFit athletes or the ones that qualify the regional, so to speak, what you've seen?
I would say, I would have to say maybe only, say, out of the top 30, only probably 2 or 3, maybe.
It's going to change when they watch this.
Yeah. Well, honestly, it's definitely something that I think has had amazing benefit for me in recent years. That the one thing that I think, like, I wish I had gotten onto this a lot earlier, because it did add such a good aspect of training, and it gave me such good resilience in training effect, and also the ability to recover. At the moment, like I have so many other priorities. Like I just love to surf at the moment, so I'm just surfing. I've sort of come to a point like this will be my 11th CrossFit season, and I'm kind of at the point where breathing for specific, high performance training. I'm kind of leaning now more towards, I love to train, I love to compete, and I love to get out there, but I would love to be able to adapt my breath to be able to, probably handle the ocean more so, and handle surfing it more so these days. But I definitely think this is something that can help people improve their recovery, improve their ability to maintain composure in workouts. And like ultimately, you're always fighting some type of muscular soft tissue damage somewhere. This can only be beneficial if you can help to oxygenate that body and to help recover those tissues better. So I definitely think it's on its way for sure.
I have two questions, James. I keep on butting in front of Daniel. Sorry, Daniel, you go ahead.
No, you go ahead, Patrick. I'll take mine later on.
One question is, you pay attention to your breathing during physical exercise, and you talk about entering flow states whereby you're in that state of total alertness but relaxation. A lovely place to be. Many psychologists, they want their athletes to get to that state. And I don't think it's going to happen if the athlete has dysfunctional breathing patterns and poor sleep. I think if their physiology is in that stress response, and all you have to be doing is breathing a little bit faster and harder, and you're in that increased sympathetic or stress response and a decreased relaxation response, do you pay attention to your breathing outside of your training? In other words, do you use breathing techniques outside of your training and to improve your breathing during your everyday in order to improve your breathing during physical exercise? And the second one is that I would say that all of the things that you were doing are totally applicable for surf. I'm an advisor with Laird Hamilton's XPT, and you're obviously aware of Laird, and the same breath hold techniques, and they have protocols in the pool of going down the water, walking along the bottom with weights, coming back up, hyperventilation, breath holding, reduced breathing, nose breathing, pretty much what you're doing. So it's transferable.
That's good. Well, I'm glad I'm on point. I wish, I would actually really love, I was almost going to book in and go and do the XPT course just for fun.
It's
and
brilliant.
Just to be able to experience it. I have one slight issue with one of my ears. I perforated it surfing once, and now diving down more than 12 feet is excruciating. So I have to practice. I've got to get back into a habit of practicing my regulation more so, because now I have a decreased air canal size. So every time I go down too quickly, it's excruciating. It'll start to bleed, and it's just not, it's not a good time. So I would like to practice it more. But in terms of breath work that I like to do, and I typically do this in the sauna, and I do this in the float tank, because I love to float, always have, ever since probably 2012. And I do love to sit in my sauna. So I definitely use those techniques, especially if I'm really wound up, especially at nighttime as well. All I'll do is I'll just go back to slow inhales, slow holds, slow exhales. And sometimes I won't even put a timer on it. I'll literally just go back to retention and relaxation. And I will do it as long as feels necessary. So it's almost like intuitive breathing. So I'll breathe in nice and smooth until I'm comfortable, and only to a certain point, and that could take 8 seconds. And then I'll hold that breath as long as I feel like it's not excruciating, and it could be 5 or it could be 15. And then I'll usually do a nice long exhale, and that exhale could take 25 seconds or it could take 10 seconds. And I'll usually do this to calm myself. And I usually find by the time I'm done, I'll do, say, 10 rounds of that. And typically by that point, I've fallen asleep. So that's usually something that I like to add into practice, especially if I'm really heightened or I'm stressed about something, or, I've got the jitters from training, and winding down and getting back into parasympathetic is very, very difficult. That's typically what I'll do.
Totally. And it's a great way to bring that balance in the autonomic nervous system. Just for people who might be listening, when you're taking your breath in, you said you're taking a smooth breath through the nose. It's not one of these necessarily full big breaths where you hear your breathing that you see in different studios. So you're breathing in very easy for about 8 seconds, smooth, silent through the nose. And then you're holding your breath for a period of time. And then you have a really, really slow and relaxed exhalation for up to, I think you mentioned 25 seconds. You're having air hunger for a lot of that breath. That will be in contrast to somebody who might be breathing in for 8 seconds, holding their breath for a period of time until they feel air hunger, and then getting rid of the breath as quickly as possible. And everything that you're doing is stimulating the vagus nerve. The breath hold is stimulating the vagus nerve, but also the breath hold is allowing oxygen to go from the lungs into the blood. The prolonged and slow and relaxed exhalation, of course, is increasing CO2, which stimulates the vagus nerve, but also the prolonged exhalation stimulates the vagus nerve, which secretes a substance called acetylcholine, which I'm sure you're familiar with. This causes the heart rate to start slowing down. And when the heart rate is slowing down, the brain interprets that everything is safe. So it's almost that we change our breathing patterns to tell the brain about the environment around us. And you're relaxed in the sauna, you're having really, really slow breathing, you're changing your physiology, and the brain is reading that your physiology is changing, and your brain then will send signals of calm to the body. It's a very simple hack. I can only imagine that there's plenty of people, they get stressed, they go into this fast, rapid breathing, and they just go with the fast, rapid breathing without even realizing that you can change that, and you can alter the signaling to the brain by changing your breathing. And that's what you're doing.
Yeah.
I can see, James, that you have an Aura ring, right? You have it on, yeah. So first off, you get it in the, I mean, you can see improvements in your workouts, but do you actually see what Patrick's talking about also, like objectively? Can you see that when you increase your doses of breath training, that your heart rate variability increases as well?
Yeah, well, typically I like to always look for, and this is, I can usually tell when I'm pretty beat down in the gym, and if I've had high volume, or if, you know, something has really triggered me or put me in a deficit, I can usually see, and I love to look at it, yes, for the HRV, but I always just love to look at my resting heart rates on any given day. Like I might find that, oh, we've had some low days this week in terms of training volume, but then I'll look at my heart rate and it might be sitting 7 beats a minute overnight more than normal. But then it's usually a delayed effect from last week, which was, you know, crazy high volume. And I'll be like, typically I'll be sitting, you know, say maybe overnight, I might get down to say mid to low 30s, but then sometimes I can't get this thing down below 43, 44 beats a minute overnight. It's like, okay, there's some residual buildup of volume that my body is still trying to recover from. Just be aware of this. And it might just be a thought in my mind that I might just need to go and find parasympathetic, you know, 2 more times this week for a little bit longer, and that may help me. But 100%, you definitely see benefits in your metrics. You definitely have better control. You definitely do find that you can sustain low heart rate for, you know, more time during the day, and especially overnight. And you can see it in the data too. Like it's pretty phenomenal. And that's not even with a ton of extra physical activity. It's just being able to be able to tap into that parasympathetic more often, and the more you do it, the better you become subconsciously. It happens subconsciously instead of, you know, having to go, okay, breathe through my nose. It just happens, and then you're there majority of the time. Even just sitting on the couch, you can find parasympathetic if you're in tune with just naturally breathing through your nose more often.
Yeah, I think it reinforces the habit. If you see what you're doing is actually improving what you're doing, you get an extra boost. Same with your CrossFit training, because for most people, that's why I think it's difficult, because they don't have necessarily an Oura ring. They don't have the CrossFit feedback, the immediate feedback, and can see improvement. And when you don't feel improvement, maybe subjectively a little bit, maybe you don't continue to have it. So I think there's a time and place for these measurements. Maybe not focus too much, but at the same time, you need them to see that you're going the right way.
Absolutely. And this is what Brian was really good at. He was very, very good at explaining to me the reasons why we wanted to do it. And I was like, okay, just let me know what I need to do. Let me know what I should expect to see and feel. And he would just be like, okay, try this, try this, try this. I would give feedback. I would give him my data points and results. And he would be like, perfect, we're on track. Let's increase here. Let's tweak this. Let's give you an extra set here. Let's get you reaching, instead of reaching aerobic threshold now after retesting so we would do a test, and you'd be interested in knowing this test as well. We basically would start on the assault bike. We would start off at 52 RPMs, and then we would take a heart rate measurement, and we would go nose only for as long as we could. Every minute we would up it by 2 RPMs, and we would also take a heart rate measurement there. And it may go up by 5 beats a minute, 5 beats a minute, 5 beats a minute. And then out of nowhere, you would get a 12 beats a minute spike. And then we would circle that one. And then we would continue. And it'd be like 3 beats a minute, 4 beats a minute, 3 beats a minute, 4 beats a minute. And then you'd get another spike, 9 beats a minute. Then we would circle that area. And every time we would do this ramp test, we would then get new metrics and new data points, and it'd be like, okay, cool. You held nose only the first time you did this up until 27 beats a minute. You're now holding nose only up to 163 beats a minute. Okay. And you're not getting these spikes until later on. So now my spikes wouldn't be happening at, say, 27. Now they're happening at 38 and 64 rather than 27 and 42. So these types of data points I thought were very interesting to me, and it gave me some physical metrics that I could go, cool, you're improving. Good job. Keep going. Like, this is great. This is what you need.
Did you ever measure your max pulse and how long it took to drop down, let's say a minute as a benchmark, to see? I mean, in CrossFit, I think that's crucial too. You get so high up that how fast can you come down? Because now you're going the other way. So did you ever measure that?
Yeah. So the point for me to reset each one of these efforts, so the 5 efforts on the 30-second max, the 4 efforts on the 7 minutes. I think we started off with 4 by 6 minutes, and then we increased it to 4 by 7 minutes eventually. I would not be allowed to start the next set until my heart rate dropped below 100 beats a minute.
Okay.
That was the test. And I do have these results somewhere. I can't remember off the top of my head, but over time, it did get quicker. I know that for sure, but I do have the results somewhere, which I'll try and find for you guys too.
Yeah, that'd be great. And what type of breathing did you do to drop your heart rate? Was it just prolonged nasal breathing on exhale?
Yeah, it was literally just an intuitive nasal breath. Breathe as needed through the nose, up until you could then start to take back control naturally of the breath. So if I needed to breathe quickly through my nose for the initial phases of that recovery period, I would do that. But then as soon as comfortably possible, I would then revert back to long inhales and then long exhales again, which then became easier under stressful volume too, which I also then took as, okay, you're becoming more adapted to this CO2 than you were before, because typically a lot of people get a little bit of CO2 and it's a freak out moment, which happened to me for a couple of weeks. And then, every time we wanted a new stimulus, it would happen again slightly. We would make the test harder and we would make the training a little bit harder. So then I would still get that stress factor to try and promote the change. And then basically from there, we would just get it to a point until it was time to get ready for competition and go out and compete.
That's fantastic. I think so right now, do you do the same amount of breath work as you did a few years ago, or more or less on any given week?
Any given week, I definitely do less. I do less dynamic, but I do breathe every day. So I'll always keep my cadence breath as my staple that I like to do regardless, whether it's 10 minutes or 5 minutes. I will always do some cadence breathing every day. When I'm getting prepared for competition, then I'll start to structure some dynamic work. But if I'm doing anything monostructural in my training, if I'm getting on, the C2 bike out in the gym for 60 minutes, I'm only nose breathing. That's just a staple piece of work. So even if I go for a run, I have a loop. Literally, I have the beach just out here and I have a loop that's 6 kilometers. I'll always do that nose only. There's not a point where I'll run through my mouth unless I'm doing like a mile time trial or something like that, where it's like you're in the hurt locker, or like a like a 5K 4-time. I'll start out nose only, but then when I have to revert, I'll revert. But if I'm doing just, 70% max heart rate work, only nose. And, I could stop doing the hard training now and still come back and be able to do 70% nose only anytime. I wouldn't have to work hard at doing that. And I would probably still be able to really push myself if I wanted to do say 9 or 10-second cadence breath work for 10 minutes.
Mm. So you would say you would do in a normal tough workout, like say 10 or 15 minutes of intense workout. How much of that workout would you do when you train via the nose?
I would say probably at least, well, I don't like to go to red line every single day. So I'd probably say at least 50%. And that 50% wouldn't be the first 50% of the workout. It would be, say, the first maybe 30% of the workout. But then for the periods during the last part, I would find areas where I need to regain control. And that might be a transition period, walking from that bar to that bar or walking from there to there, which I'll regain time in nose breathing. But if I'm doing a monostructural piece of equipment in a Metcon that requires gymnastics and getting upside down on my hands, but there's also a proponent of, say, rowing or ski erg or assault bike, on those elements, I'm nose breathing for sure. Getting back in control, regaining. And if there's a 5-rounder and you can find 45 to 60 seconds where you can get back to nose breathing, you're doing that every single round. And then when you go back to your crazy gymnastics where you're climbing a rope and then doing handstand walking, okay, you can save that time to do your mouth breathing because you're in all sorts of discomfort and craziness. But then when you go back, you then find peace again.
I think fantastic answer, because I think these are the specific answers you need to understand that when you do certain exercises, you can nose breathe. Some are much tougher. So you don't think if you're a CrossFitter that you try to do it all the time, because it's more difficult maybe doing handstand push-ups versus a rowing machine. And these are the specifics you need to work on. Also, when you switch in between sets and reps and all that, how you do it, I think those are great answers, because I think also from my own experience, you suffer not only in that workout, but also the day after. If you mouth breathe too much, it causes a little bit of trauma. You can see your heart rate variability go down, and the next day you can't train 100%. So you have to think not only about that day, but also for the next day and the whole week. So I think those, Patrick, those are fantastic answers. So you have to really dial in very specifically of how you do it. And, it's not 100% here or 0 here, but it's a mix. And certain days you go nose breathing only, some 50-50, certain exercises. So you have to specify that. So I think that is how you get into it. Because if you just say nose breathe, it will be too tough, and people will just not do it.
Exactly. I think you definitely have to be intuitive with this type of stuff. And I think when sometimes these are explained, the immediate thought in someone's mind is, so I have to do everything through my nose, and they try it once and think, I'm not doing that. I can't get any intensity. If I can't get any intensity, I'm not going to do well. And it's like, okay, yeah, probably right. But you do have elements. You can work it in as long as you're maybe educated or taking the time, or you're being coached by someone who knows what they're talking about. I was very lucky to have Brian, who knew his shit. So it was cool for me to get exposed to that. Another really cool thing I remember, and this is a stat, I say from before, like almost a comparison. I remember I was in Bali, probably 2015, and I wanted to do a max breath hold. And I think my all-time record for breath hold, and I did this with a couple of friends and my partner in the pool, and I just did a top of the water breath hold. I had them around me, so there was no chance of shallow water blackout. So just letting everyone know that. Don't do it by yourself.
That's an important point.
Yes. And I didn't know what I was doing at the time. I just took a couple of deep breaths and then just went under the water and just kind of sat there like stale on top of the water. 3 minutes, 3:01 or something like that. Then I was in isolation earlier in the year after a bobsled training camp, and I was in hotel quarantine in Adelaide here. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to do some breath work in my bed every morning. I'm going to do some more so inhale releases. I'm going to do 30 reps of inhale release. I'm going to release all my air, and then I'm going to hold it out as long as possible without feeling the urge to breathe again. And I'm going to repeat this for 4 rounds every morning. And so I went on and did this, and I would do my hyperventilation portion and get oxygen up. And then I would let it all go and keep it out and see how long I could hold. I started off and I would get around 2 minutes on my breath out, get to around about 2 minutes, feel like I need to breathe, and then start my next round. I did this, and then every day for the 14 days that I did it, I would get a little bit longer. Some days would drop back by maybe 10 seconds, and I would never look at the clock. I would always do it in my head, so I didn't have any gauge. And then, so slowly it climbed up, and then I was getting to 3 minutes with the breath out. And I was like, wow, this is pretty cool. Like before, I would take a breath in and get to 3 minutes. Now I can do it on a breath out after 30 hyperventilation breaths. I wonder how far I could go if I did a hyperventilation and then breathed in and then held, see how long I could, just overall hold, given the best circumstances, laying in my bed. And so this is the funny thing. And this goes back to what you said about your mind then becoming calm in the situation. And it's almost like when you have that CO2 and that influx, you almost get into that calm state. I did this. The first 3 minutes was medium. It wasn't hard. It wasn't easy, but it was nothing. But then from 3 minutes to 5 minutes 30, nothing. Didn't feel a thing. Time went quicker than I'd ever expected. I literally looked at the clock at 3 minutes and thought, I'm probably only going to get 4 minutes here. The next time I looked at the clock, 5 minutes 40. It's like time just flew past, didn't even realize, made it to 6 minutes 02. Wow. And I was literally just like, I was blown away. I was like, this is not right. Did I like pass out or like what happened?
Maybe.
Can happen.
Yeah.
But it can only happen if you do hyperventilation beforehand. That's why it's a good idea to do it lying down in your bed, because at least
I would.
If your blood oxygen saturation drops, you can recover.
Did you have a pulse oximeter on there, James? Did you ever use a pulse oximeter?
I did. Yes, I did for sure. So I was using a pulse oximeter for some of this training as well. Brian had me use one. I can't remember exactly what I would be aiming to, but there were some types of training that he would try and have me holding within certain ranges of blood sats. That was a really cool thing. I also used to use an altitude machine that I would basically wear a mask for. I would bring down my blood sats to a particular percentage, and I would just sit there and just breathe on that for 40 minutes, 50 minutes, 60 minutes. I never did it overnight. Because I never wanted to affect my recovery in the nighttime as much. But I did do it, say, post long aerobic nasal session. I might do, say, 50 minutes of nose breathing at a very aerobic pace, 50 to 60% effort, and then go and sit on the oxygen machine, bring my blood sats down to maybe low 80s, say 80 to 85% blood sats or whatever it may be.
It's
and then sit there. Yeah, and then sit there for maybe 40 minutes. And then go from there. But it was, I remember I did have some metrics on that. Can't exactly remember what they were, but I have done that before.
Yeah, we use the pulse ox a lot. I think it's important. Daniel was talking about motivating earlier on, but even just from a safety point of view, because we want people to, normal blood oxygen saturation is between 95 to 99%. When you go below 91%, you're going into hypoxia. When you go below 88%, you're going into severe hypoxia. In the low 80s, you're fine. If you go into the 70s, you can get a bit disoriented. If you go into the 60s and the 50s, there's a risk of passing out. Now, normally you won't pass out if you just hold your breath after normal breathing. The time that you can pass out is if you hyperventilate and you blow off so much carbon dioxide, and that's the alarm to breathe. So if you hyperventilate and then you breathe out and hold your breath, you don't feel any sensation to breathe. So you can hold your breath for a long time. but that's sufficient for your oxygen saturation to drop very low and without warning. So your point about underwater blackout is absolutely crucial. Never to hyperventilate and get into the pool doing breath holds. It's crazy stuff. But yeah, it's great, James. We're going to draw to a close because we're so grateful for your time. And
it's fantastic.
It's been brilliant. Yeah.
I think I see 10 topics that I would like to continue on. I just so many things, but I just have one final question, and it's more generic. Like you use these breath exercises for CrossFit and also for surfing, but have you noticed also a difference for you in your personal life and also in terms of sleep? Because I know that's the thing about breathing. It's incorporated in everything you do. So what you do for CrossFit has other applications in life. So has that improved as well for you? Anything else besides sports?
Yeah, honestly, and this probably is something that probably wasn't at the top of my mind. This is not something that I thought was going to be the result of breath work, but it's literally just a more relaxed demeanor in day-to-day life. It helps you to not freak out about small things. Someone cuts you off in traffic. It's not so, you're not heightened about that. You can approach conversations in a more relaxed fashion. It's literally just taking you down a peg or bringing you back to just, level again, instead of just being that heightened over mouth breather all the time. That's, just erratic. I think that's a big bonus of this type of work. I definitely find that I'm a lot more relaxed in day-to-day life, but then also, yes, my sleep in particular is much, much better. Trying to work on that sleep hygiene, as we like to call it, with the guys that I work with at Under Armour, and they love the breath work too. Like that's, for them, this is like one of their most intriguing, topics.
Are you working with Mike Watts?
I certainly am.
You are?
Actually,
Mike is one of our instructors as well.
Yeah, I was on a phone call with him earlier today.
That's mad. God, it's a small world.
I know. Well, actually, when I first met the guys over there at the Performance Center, he said to me, he goes, "Oh, so what do you do for recovery?" And I was like, "I love breath work." And he's like, "No way." and then we're
total breath nerds, James, because we were the ones that were on the fringes for 2 decades. And and you know what really has surprised me? Why have sports medicine scientists in all of the universities throughout the world, there's only been a handful of them that have had any interest in breathing? It's just because you can imagine all of these strength and conditioning coaches coming out of universities in sports medicine for recovery, for sleep, for prevention of injury. Functional breathing and functional movement go together, and they haven't delved into it. So the innovations have happened with individuals like myself, with Brian, with other people, with Daniel, helping to put it out there. And then athletes, the early adopters like yourself, who have taken it on board and you've ran with it. And I think it's tremendous. I've been waiting 20 years to see this happen. So it's been absolutely amazing. So kudos to you and fair play.
I'm glad to help spread the word. I think it's good for everybody. And if anyone talks to me about it, then I'm always advocating for it. So hopefully it becomes more mainstream.
Great stuff. Thanks very much, James.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much, James.